Hi everybody, this is Agnes from No Sediment, and today let's talk about Sangiovese. More specifically, how it shapes and presents itself in different terroirs, namely Chianti Classico, Brunello di Montalcino and Vino Nobile di Montepulciano. There are grape varieties that are praised for their ability to express different terroirs. One of them often cited for this is Sangiovese. According to one of the leading experts on Italian wine, Ian Diagata, Sangiovese is capable of showing even the slightest changes in climate or soil. And to truly experience that, we must examine it in the blind tasting. But before we do it, let's briefly talk about what we can expect from Sangiovese in each of these terroirs. Even though Sangiovese is cultivated in almost every corner of Italy and therefore can be found under various names, today I will focus only on Tuscany, as it has the most hectares planted under this grape. Furthermore, this is where it is more often found as a monovarietal wine. The three best-known wines and which we will be tasting today are Brunello di Montalcino, Vino Nobile di Montepulciano and Chianti Classico. I would have loved to add Morellino di Scansano to the list, but unfortunately it was impossible to source in my market. Sangiovese is a grape variety that is not capable of producing deeply colored, inky wines. This is one of the reasons why in 2008 certain Brunello producers were accused of using other grape varieties to intensify the color, because these wines were showing atypically deep color for Sangiovese. Sangiovese always delivers elevated, mouth-watering acidity, which is its character no matter where it is grown. This is complemented by high levels of drying tannins. Therefore, despite it being very sensitive in expressing its terroir, I believe it has a great ability to still retain its character, especially when made in a monovarietal wine. So let's talk about what I would expect from these three wines and their respective terroirs. Note that I have made individual videos on all three appellations and wines, which I will link in the description if you are interested in exploring them in more detail, after watching this video, of course. Chianti Classico is defined by relatively cool climate, and winemakers are exploring this terroir even more by planting their vineyards at higher elevations. Chianti Classico can be made as a monovarietal wine entirely from Sangiovese, but it can also be made with additions of other grape varieties. These can include certain local grapes as well as international varieties such as Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. And I have experienced firsthand how the very delicate flavors of Sangiovese can be easily overpowered by the structure and distinct black fruit nose of Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot. So for this video, I specifically looked for 100% Sangiovese Chianti Classico to ensure that our tasting is complete. Because of the cooler climate, I often find Chianti Classico wines showing medium body and a perfumed red sour cherry strawberry nose. In my view, Chianti Classico wines are often more defined by their acidity and will have less oak influencing their flavors. In the Montalcino area where Brunello is made, historically the southern slopes have been favored. This usually resulted in a more powerful, richer and fuller in body wine styles, and yet the best producers were still able to retain that lively, red fruit-driven energy. Now with global climate change, many winemakers are starting to explore the northern slopes, thus introducing more freshness to the wines. I have always found Brunellos to be driven by a riper red fruit profile and often with more defined oak-influenced flavors, although that has been changing lately. Last but not least comes Vino Nobile di Montepulciano, which similarly as Chianti Classico can be made both as monovarietal wine or with other grape additions to the dominant Sangiovese. This area is characterized by slightly cooler climate than Montalcino, which is why I usually find them to be not as powerful and full-bodied as Brunellos often are. Many wine critics characterize Vino Nobile wines as the most rustic of the three, and I guess it could be the case. However, winemaker's signature plays an important role here. For me, these are wines that do not have the power of Brunello, but they show a fuller body structure than Chianti Classico. I also find them to have a bit more rounded acidity than Chianti Classico, essentially placing these wines stylistically between Brunello and Chianti Classico. And now that I have expressed my views regarding their style, let's actually taste these wines and see whether or not this theory works in practice. 3 Sangiovese wines made from 3 distinctive terroirs: Brunello de Montalcino, Chianti Classico, and Vino Nobile de Montepulciano. And as always, these wines were poured by my cameraman, so I don't know which one is which. So let's start wine number 1. Yeah, you can immediately see that this is not the deepest colored wine. So on the nose, I feel a lot of ripe strawberries, raspberries, ripe red cherries, and there is layer of earthiness, earthy backbone, and maybe some toastiness as well, like toasted skinned almonds. And almost like hint of autumn leaf character, which sometimes I find in Barolos. But it is still driven by these red berries, by wild strawberries. So nose is quite inviting. Let's taste it. Ooh, just as imagined, this wine has elevated, mouth-watering acidity. This is the first thing that you get on your palate. It is almost like explosion of sour cherry on the palate. And as promised, we do have that elevated, drawing tannin structure. When I was talking about the nose alone, I thought maybe it could be Brunello because it was kind of broad and inviting and rich and opulent. But on the palate, it is defined by its acidity and chalky mouth coating, quite expressive tannin structure. It doesn't show that full body I would expect from Brunello, and it doesn't show that warmth of alcohol that I often also associate with Brunello wines. But I have to taste the rest of the wines before I make my decision, so let's taste wine number 2. Similarly, as expected, the pale garnet color. But on the nose, it is more open, it is more opulent, it is richer and intense. And underneath it, then you have these red fruits, crushed strawberries, crushed raspberries, red cherries. This wine seems bigger and rounder and structured on the palate. It does have that alcohol backbone, but it kind of has also the flesh, so it's not acidity alone or tannin alone or alcohol alone. It does show that fleshy, that richness that I would maybe expect from Brunello. If I would have to choose right away, I would say that this actually resembles Brunello's style a bit more, but I will make my final decision afterwards. I have tasted wine number 3, so let's. Similarly as the previous wines, it is not deeply colored, so it is safe to say that we are in the Sangiovese country. And on the nose, it is immediately showing that ripeness of fruit, that crushed strawberries and maybe even slightly cooked strawberries and cherries. And on the nose, I do feel that alcohol slightly, which is interesting. Maybe it is served too warm. I mean, I have been talking here for a while now, and maybe it has gone up in the temperature, and it is the last wine that I've tasted. But I do feel that distinct alcohol on the nose, which might lead me to think that wine number 2 might not be Brunello. But let's taste. Okay, so that warmth that I'm feeling on the palate, that broad, rich, opulent texture on the palate, it is definitely Brunello style. And wine number 2 does have that toastiness, and it is rich and quite concentrated and dense. But it is not as broad, it is not as open, and it actually has that kind of verticality in its character. And if I'm coming back to wine number 1, it is opening up beautifully. On the nose, now it kind of shows these ultra fresh blueberries, which may not be always very closely linked with Sangiovese. And I do feel that wine number 1 shows that slightly rustic tannin structure that we spoke about before. And I mean, both wine number 2 and wine number 3 does have elevated tannins. However, they're more polished and structured. And here with wine number 1, they do stick to your palate and they're a bit kind of all over the place. So I would put it in the Vino Nobile de Montepulciano. However, I do think it is beautifully done and quite perfumed, and the alcohol level is really well integrated. And I will let you know that I am scoring these wines as Sangiovese wines, not necessarily as Vino Nobile or Chianti Classico, because let's be honest, I don't know which one is which, and here I am just making educated guesses, I guess. So yes, so I really enjoyed wine number 1, which I think is Vino Nobile de Montepulciano, and I will give it 92 points. Wine number 2, I think it is more open and more riper in style than I usually expect for Chianti Classicos to be. However, I tasted the wine number 3, which I thought was the biggest and roundest and richest and most concentrated of these 3, which makes me think that this wine is Chianti Classico, and I think it is absolutely amazing. I mean, the intensity of flavors here are great. It is so perfumed and so inviting, and on the palate it is amazingly long, absolutely beautiful wine, and I will give it 96 points. Did I mention that I think that this is Chianti Classico? Only because wine number 3 I think is Brunello de Montalcino, because here the broadness, the opulence of the flavors, the way it just sits on your palate, and being this big and friendly, funny friend, which everybody just wants to be around. This is Brunello here in this glass. And I think it is amazing wine. However, because I slightly feel the alcohol here, both on the nose and on the palate, I will give it 93 points. I think it is absolutely beautiful and amazing wine, but if you would ask me which wine I would choose tonight, I would choose wine number 2. Shall we reveal? Wine number 1. It is Vino Nobile de Montepulciano from Salcheto. This is absolutely amazing producer, by the way. If you do care about sustainability, if you care about carbon footprint, if you care about how heavy the glass bottle of wine is, this is the producer to choose. They are really into that, and they let you know all the information on their website, and I think their wines are absolutely amazing. And to be honest, it is one of the cheapest of these 3. I think it costs like 20-30 euros, if I'm not mistaken, and absolutely delivers in terms of quality, for sure. Wine number 2, I scored 96 points, and I said it was Chianti Classico. Okay, and it is Castell'in Chianti Classico with a very quite unique label. And this is 100% Sangiovese, and if I'm not mistaken, they only work with their Chianti Classicos with 100% Sangiovese. This style, which threw me off, it might be interesting because they are actually located in the Chianti Classico zone, which is towards the southern part. So it might make these wines a bit rounder, maybe soften the edges and maybe soften the acidity. This is definitely a broader and maybe richer, more opulent style of Chianti Classico. Absolutely amazing wine. And wine number 3, it naturally makes it Brunello de Montalcino, and I gave it 93 points. Come on. Okay, so we know very well Altesino producer. It is maybe lesser known or less discovered, but I mean, they make absolutely beautiful, clean, precise styled wines, and it is definitely one of the Brunellos that I love at my house, and I choose quite regularly because I love my Sangiovese. Okay, in this case, it seems that I did make correct educated guesses. However, wine number 2 threw me off a little bit, and I don't think necessarily it was the most typical style. Believe it or not, this is the first time when I tried this specific wine, even though it has been under my radar for a while now. I'm quite happy that I discovered it. Sangiovese is not the only grape variety that has great ability to express its terroir. Please let me know in the comments which other grape varieties you would like to see tasted similarly as we did here today. And if you like this video, make sure to click for this next.